Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's Transforming Your Team webinar. This is the first of a six-part series brought to you by the Center for Dairy Excellence on employee communications and management. This first session is focused on employee communications and relationship building. We are pleased tonight to have Dr. Rich Stup joining us to lead the call. Rich has 25 years of experience helping agricultural managers become successful leaders, and he is currently working with Cornell's Pro Dairy team. Just a couple of housekeeping details before we begin. Tonight's webinar is being recorded. Actually, all of the webinars in this series are being recorded. If you are not able to attend one of the webinars, you will be able to access the recording afterwards. Each webinar in the series qualifies for 1.5 credits through the American Association of Veterinarian State Boards Registry of Approved Continuing Education. If you are interested in the credits, we ask that you complete the short quiz made available at the end of the webinar. Otherwise, and then once you do that, we will send you a certificate that confirms your completion of the program. Finally, the last two things, we will be sending out the PowerPoint presentation from tonight's webinar series after it's ended. And if you do have any questions for Rich as we go along, please put them in the chat box or use the icon at the bottom of your screen. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you can either click on the chat box to enter your question there, or you can click on icons to wave your hand. Either way, we will be monitoring questions and we will make sure they get asked as we go along. With that, let's welcome Rich. Thanks for joining us tonight.
All right, thanks, Jane, and glad to be here, everyone. Give me a second. I'm going to share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint that we'll be putting up. There we go. Okay, and hopefully you're seeing that that PowerPoint in presentation mode. Is that right? All right, thanks everyone. And I can see many of you, and that's great. This is going to be more of a workshop style. So we're going to have some breakouts. We're going to have about, well, we have two separate breakouts, and we're going to be using Zoom's breakout feature. So I encourage you to, be prepared to take those mics off, and if you're comfortable with it, turn your cameras on, because it's always a lot nicer that way. And if you have the bandwidth, sometimes people don't have enough bandwidth to turn the camera on. That's fine. But what I also encourage you to do is a lot of times you can, instead of having a phone number show, you could have your name show in the Zoom box there. So if that's the situation, and you can figure out how to get your name in there, that would be great. But yeah, glad to be with you tonight, and glad to be working with you on this multiple part series. And communications and relationship building. That's such a big thing. It's such a broad topic, really. Communications is, but it comes up constantly as one of the challenges in farm businesses. Oh wait, is it just in farm businesses? No, it's not. It's in every type of businesses that you're ever going to work with. All types of organizations have challenges with communications. Always something that we're working on. And why? Let's dig into that why right here. Leadership depends on relationships. And let me put this together here for you a little bit. So we all communicate, right? We all communicate at different times, different ways. Some of us more than others. Some of us love to talk to other people, and some of us, it's an effort to talk to other people. But we're all communicating. We're communicating with family members, with friends. We're communicating with the people, at the convenience store when you go in. We're communicating with the lender, with the person that does your feed rations. All those people you're communicating. And some of those communications, frankly, are more important than others. So for some of those communications, we're actively working on building a relationship. So, are you really concerned about building a relationship with the person that checks you out at Target? Well, you want to be nice and have a pleasant interaction there, but generally no, right? Are you interested in building a relationship with your lender? Well, yeah, maybe so. Maybe you want to do that. In fact, I'll share that on the other side of the fence, those of you that are in sales, that's very common for people in agribusiness and sales to be talking about how we build relationships with clients and that sort of thing. So, a lot of folks are actively, consciously building relationships. And as leaders, as managers, we need to be doing the same thing all the time with the people that we want to lead, with the people that we want to have influence with. And so your leadership really depends on your relationships with the people that you supervise. And let's do a little thought exercise on that. So if how much influence does someone have? And here's the thought exercise. A perfect stranger that you meet on the street and they want to give you advice. How much influence do they really have with you? Not very much at all, right? Because you don't have a relationship. You know that there's no trust there. There's nothing built up over time. Okay, someone then that is an acquaintance of yours, someone you know their name, you've met them several times, you know that you have friends that know that person, that speak well of that person. And you interact with that person about something, and they're going to have more credibility with you because you've got a bit more of a relationship. And then we'll take it all the way to finish the analogy to someone that you have a long-term trusting relationship, that that they're a good person that's got your best interests in mind. They're going to have a lot of influence with you, with whatever their opinions are, whatever things that they share with you. The same function operates with your employees. So this is why communication becomes so critical, because we're trying to build those relationships, and ultimately, strictly from a business management standpoint, so that we can have greater influence as we try to lead people, so that they believe us more clearly, and so that we can get the kind of results that we're trying to achieve. So that ultimately that's how it works. And then when you have a manager then who struggles with communication, who doesn't like to interact with other people, that's going to be a real challenge. Now, do you have to be the extroverted personality or the social butterfly that likes to talk to everybody? Absolutely not. And we'll talk about that. We'll get into that in some more detail about some of the things that you can do. But I'm not trying to say that the only people who can be leaders are those people that are really charismatic or things like that. That's absolutely not the truth. Sometimes some things are easier for those folks, but it's not that way for everyone. All right, let's take another little exercise here, a little thought. I think some things popping up in the chat. Let me make sure everything's okay. Okay, that's just Jane sharing some housekeeping. All right. Many years ago, Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you've never read it, I would strongly recommend it. There's some great insights, and everyone should read that once in their lifetime anyway. One of those concepts that he shared in there is this idea of an emotional bank account. And this idea is that we have an emotional bank account with all these other people that we have a relationship with. And we can, much like your regular bank account, we can make deposits in that. And there's on the left, those are some of the things that are like deposits that build up the balance in that emotional bank account. So anytime we keep a promise with someone, we show that we're trustworthy. That adds to the balance. Little acts of kindness that, you care something for that person. Loyalty, when times are down and things are tough, you're loyal to that person. Listening clearly, this is a day-to-day thing, and we don't all do it very well. Too often, when we're supposed to be listening, we're actually thinking about what we are going to say next. And that's really not listening, because at that point, we're not able to keep our full attention on that person. We're not able to really hear and understand what that person is trying to say to us. Sincere apologies when something goes wrong and you give a sincere apology. I acknowledge that. I am sorry that happened, and I will try to do better in the future. And then last, setting clear expectations. And that really sets us up for some of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later tonight. But being clear about whatever our expectations are critically important. At the same time as we make deposits, we can also make withdrawals from that emotional bank account. And those withdrawals are, well, broken promises, just the opposite of what we had with kept promises. I'll never forget one of these for myself in a management role I had with an organization, and we were doing some restructuring and changing. A woman worked on my team, and we were actually assigning some different roles in the new reorganization. And we needed her to stay in her old position for about at least another year. And I made a commitment from my role as the manager in that location that she would get into this new type of position after that year passed. Well, life happened, a year went by, and I didn't have the authority at that time to make that happen in a year. And so for me, I always felt like a broken promise with her. And it made me very, very cautious in the future about what I might promise to someone. Keeping distant and disconnected, or not working on that relationship, not talking. I take it right down to that, in the morning when people show up for work, do you say hello? Do you make eye contact? Do you try to connect with those people? If you're not, then you're probably keeping distant and disconnected. So if you're leading, if you're supervising others, even if it's difficult for you, make those little things happen. Certainly, like saying hello in the morning. Gossip and broken trust, certainly things that could be big withdrawals. Certainly not listening. People pick up on that pretty quickly if you're not listening to what they're saying. Certainly arrogant behavior, dismissive behavior of others, all of those things. Now, what happens with this emotional bank account? What if you've got an employee that you're working with, and there's something tough that has to happen? There's some bad news that has to come along. And I've been making a lot of withdrawals. How's that going to go over with that employee? It's going to be a lot tougher, right? Because that emotional bank account has a low balance in it. But what if it's got a full balance, and that person is very positive, very strong in our relationship, has a lot of trust in me? Then that negative thing that I have to let that person know about, that's going to be a lot easier to receive because of the full balance that's in that bank account. So keep those things in mind about that accounting of your bank account. Yeah, unclear or false expectations. One other thing there. What about your attitude? What about your demeanor and how you communicate? We've all learned in the past at different times about things like body language, how we are interacting. And, in this world of Zoom where we don't get to see each other as much, or we don't get to be in the room right now, I can see a few faces, and that's wonderful. If we were all together, I could see all of you in the room, and that would be so much better. But that's not where we are. But we can do a lot to control our body language. And look at this. Look at these two pictures of the woman in the scene there, where on the right side, she's got a more welcoming attitude, just a bit of a smile. Her body language is kind of a more open posture. Whereas on the left side, there's more of a closed off attitude. Now, this could be, if you look at her face, there's no smile there. It's more of a neutral to a frown. She's got her arm crossed, a little bit more of a closed off type of attitude. This could be a man or a woman. Anyone could show this kind of body language. And when you compare the two, you can easily see, a difference there, and whether they appear to be closed off or welcoming. Do we, other than what we can read from body language, do we really know how this person is feeling today? Let's say her name is Sue. How is Sue feeling today? Is she welcome and open, or is she closed off? Just looking, we'd have to think closed off. But, she might be feeling perfectly fine. And, if her natural, appearance and face is like that we see on the left, then, she might want to think about that and think about how she appears to other people, if it's employees, for example. So I give that example again of, that dairy manager that shows up in the morning and hasn't had his coffee yet. It has a big frown on, and it seems pretty unapproachable. Well, he may not be that unapproachable, but he may just look that way, and the employees may very well be interpreting that body language that way. So we can do little things. Smile more, makes a big difference. Do things to make yourself available for the employees. Talk to them about that, encourage them to approach you, and then, try to have the body language that is open and that is welcoming. If I had some bad news to share with if that was my boss in the image, I would be much happier to approach her when she looked that way on the right than on the left. Another thought there is to carve out part of your workday when you're just open and available to talk. Managers can get so busy running around and solving all the problems and dealing with all the issues that they forget to just take time, stop, take time, and be available for the employees. Sometimes this is just managing by walking around, getting around to see everyone, to pop in, say hello. This goes a long way when you take some of those steps. But then also being available. Hey, do you have any questions? Hey, I maybe gave a little positive feedback that I appreciate your work today and you're doing a great job with whatever that is. Say hello. All those little things add up and make a big difference about how communication flows on your farm. Yeah, and I said that already. Manage by walking around. Just be visible and available for your team. Teddy Roosevelt is credited with this quote: "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." So they're just not going to listen to what you know until they know that you really care about them and have their best interests in mind. Another thought along those lines is that most people are constantly evaluating if others care. So you can do some things. You can show them, employees, that you care by taking them seriously, respecting their individuality as individuals, not as just a whole group of people. By using the active listening that we talked about, paying attention, and trying to really understand and ask follow-up questions of our employees. Taking steps to overcome any language barriers, even when it's hard. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at another point. But when you've got a language barrier in the farm, you as the managers, and you as the owner in particular, and for those of you that are working with clients out there, if you're going to hire people on the farm that speak a different language, you need to take steps to overcome that language barrier. And again, we'll talk about that some more, but ultimately it's your responsibility as the owner and the most senior managers to overcome that barrier. Spending your valuable time in communication. People know that you're busy. When you take time with them, and specifically to be with them, that sends a message that you're spending your valuable time that way. Make eye contact, of course, part of being open. And then this last one I always like to point out. Everybody has their own name, and their own name is precious to them, right? If you want to be listened to and really build that relationship with your employees, take time to remember their names, to learn their names, everyone's names, and use their names when you're talking with them. Just a little trick, not really a trick. It's really a sign of respect, but it's very, very powerful when you know people's names and you can say it to them. So that's another tip to think about from a showing interest in people's standpoint. Back to the multilingual workplace. You got to overcome that language barrier, and that might mean bringing people in. That might mean bringing a consultant in. Those are important strategies. It's an important thing to use, and an interpreter when you've got difficult things that you're trying to cover and trying to address, or something that are more complicated, that gets away from that dairy Spanish, that Spanglish that you might be speaking on the farm. So having those people come on a regular basis to help with that, but that's not the whole answer. The day something goes wrong or there's a safety issue on the farm, that interpreter is not going to be there to help you unless you're really, really lucky, but you can't plan for that. So, you've got, from a safety standpoint, you've got to be able to communicate with each other. And the solution to that in the long run is to be able to, for the managers, the people that are going to be there in the long run, to learn Spanish and be able to speak it. Because they're not going to turn over as much generally as what more of our frontline people will do. And so we've got, if we're making that commitment to the multilingual workforce, we need to have the managers and owners begin to learn Spanish, even if it's a basic Spanish. And it's not just the language barriers. We also need to be thinking about breaking down those cultural barriers and not letting those things build up. What can we do to encourage people to interact as much as possible, to get to know each other. And what I'm getting at is that I've seen in dairies, there's an increasing situation where we've got the milking crew that's all Spanish speaking, and we've got the outside or the shop crew or the field crew that's Americans that are English speaking. And a lot of times we've got two camps, and they just don't mix very much. They don't talk to each other very much because of the barriers that are there in place. As owners, managers, we really need to take steps to break that down. It's never going to be perfect. We're never going to be everybody able to fluently speak each other's language, but steps you can take to make some progress on either side, to create some interaction, to build those relationships among the team, those are great. And, you know, I just want to encourage you that, I mean, I know we're talking about Pennsylvania right now. You don't have the challenge of union organizing and that sort of thing that dairies in New York are dealing with right now, but you might in the future. And what I'm trying to emphasize with dairy farms is, and all farms, frankly, is don't have different groups of people on your farm that don't understand each other, that don't know each other, that aren't interacting and building relationships. Work on building that team, even when we've got some cultural differences there. It's can be hard work, but it's well worth your time. All right. Okay, a couple of things here then. What should supervisors talk about with employees? Like I said, not everybody is going to be, you know, really have the gift of gab and really enjoy talking and building relationships. Some of you and some of your clients out there are going to be more on the introverted side of the scale. It takes a lot of energy to talk to people and build relationships. And so it takes a lot out of you versus the extroverted people who actually gain energy, who feel good when they're interacting and talking with other people. So, and some people, frankly, aren't so good at small talk and relationship. And so I've heard over the years, you know, colleagues and other business educators talk about, okay, you need to talk about these things with employees. Well, no, I'm going to go a little bit backwards here. Let me go here. Politics and religion. Should we be talking about those things with employees? Well, we might say no right away, but I'm going to say probably not. Okay, probably not in most cases, but in some cases, when you've got a connection between the manager and their employees over one of these issues, it could be politics, it could be religion. Religion's probably the better one. And that connection is part of the relationship and part of building a strong relationship with that person. Go ahead. If it's a positive part of your relationship, that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. Now, there's going to be people with different opinions and backgrounds and viewpoints. You need to be careful in your workplace that you don't have these issues causing problems or causing people to feel unsafe in the workplace or to feel discriminated against in the workplace because they might have different points of view on politics or religion. So that's where I would say draw the lines. A little bit more nuanced than just no. It is, you know, in some cases, yes. In most cases, you need to be very, very careful with that and probably not spend a lot of time talking about those issues. But then there's often the recommendations about this, backgrounds and interests. Well, if you've got some commonality, they're wonderful. The guy I used to supervise, we were both remodeling houses at the time, and we could always talk about those things, you know, just kind of that chit chat and relationship building. Oh, family and kids. Well, when you've got young kids at home and that sort of thing, it's often easy to really connect with other people that have young kids at home and that sort of thing. Hobbies and interests, you know, Pennsylvania, probably a lot of hunters there, and fishers, and, you know, all kinds of different people have outside hobbies, relationships, that sort of thing. Yeah, if you've got those things, that's great. Are you going to have those with every employee? Probably not. And if you're trying to force those topics when it doesn't interest you, and maybe it doesn't interest the employee, it's simply not going to work. And so, you know, there's been so many people that have recommended these things. Great, they work sometimes, but sometimes they just don't. And some people just aren't into small talk. And you know what? I got an answer for you. And that's these last three. Because we've all got the work itself. We've got that commonality right there. And there's nothing wrong with having a business relationship built around the work itself, your business, the type of production you're in, the dairy industry, Oh, and then even better, the last one there, your employees' potential and their growth opportunities. With a lot of employees, we can talk about those last three things at length. You know, you've got employees, and I'm sure you've got some employees that just love cows and love what they do. And so they can talk about those things, and you can really build relationship around those things. But when I share those things, because I just want to reassure you that if the work is what you have in common with employees, talk about it. Talk about it a lot. In fact, you should be talking about that at least some with everybody. All right, three quick major relationship factors. And I say quick because I want to get to one of our breakouts. The first one is trust. And I want to say guard your integrity and follow through on commitments. You know, I shared a little bit about that situation I had many years ago in my career where I wasn't able to give that promotion, where I had essentially made a commitment that it would happen in a year. You know, that was one where, you know, her trust in me would have been less at that point. Another area that's related to this is one of those situations that you're all going to experience at one time or another if you're a supervisor. And that is, you've got a problem going on with an employee, but you haven't necessarily seen or experienced it yourself. It's other employees that are telling you about that. And I'm saying you as a supervisor. You've got other employees that are telling you about that. And they're saying, well, you know, Joe over here has been doing this or saying that, or whatever it might be. And at some point, you as a supervisor, you got to address this. You got multiple people telling you about it. You can't let this go. We'll get into conflict later, but you can't be a conflict avoider. You've got to address these sort of things that you've got employees telling you about. One of the first steps there is to, you know, encourage that employee, possibly, depending on the situation, to, you know, to talk to the problem employee themselves and see if they can work it out. If it's something between the two of them. If it's work related, then that's not going to work. You're going to have to address it as a supervisor. But the fact is, you've got information from this one person that told you, and you're going to go talk to this other person. And what is that other person going to say as soon as you start to bring up the issue? Well, how'd you know that? Who told you that? And now what are you going to do? So this situation will come up, and I want you to be prepared for it, supervisors. So in that situation, when that first person talks to you, the first and best thing to do is ask permission. Can I use your name? Can I say that you and I talked about this? And if you do that, and they give you permission, which is the ideal situation, then you'll be in a position where you can guard your integrity and not compromise that relationship. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes they won't give that permission. And then you've got a difficult situation. The next best thing is to go try to observe the behavior yourself to try to be able to deal with it in that way. Respect. You know, one of the things is learn how others want to be treated. And the culture is going to have an impact on this, whether they are shy or outgoing and that sort of thing. But learning about people is really important. I'm big on giving praise, giving them positive feedback to people. I had a person on my team that was shy, and she really didn't want to have any kind of public praise. I didn't know that, and she didn't tell me that until after I'd been there for about a year. And then I figured it out. But, you know, praising some people, most people in public, you know, they appreciate that, like in a meeting or something like that. But some people don't appreciate that. They feel embarrassed and feel disrespected. Learn, my point here is learn what people want. Talk to them. It's okay to ask, you know, how do you like to interact with people? What, you know, when I want to give you some positive feedback, how do you like to hear it? And then fairness, you know, be mindful of how you distribute rewards and justice at work. If you've got an employee handbook, which I encourage you to have, make sure you're following it and that those policies are applied in a fair and just way at work and consistently. It can't be one way with your buddies, long-term employees, and another way with everybody else. Things need to be handled in a fair and just way. So those three things are super important for managers, supervisors, in building relationships with employees so you have credibility and can actually lead people. That trust, respect, and fairness, which you've got to protect and manage in order to build those relationships. All right. Okay. Clear expectations. So the Gallup organization has done a tremendous amount of research over the years with organizations all around the world. And they actually recently came out with a book. It's called It's the Manager. And the key point of that is that they're talking about relationships that managers have with employees and how there's so many things that managers can do to increase effectiveness in organizations and companies, profitability, and ultimately their thesis of the book is, wellness and wealth around the world by improving relationships. And actually that is carried out. Some of their research on employee engagement shows a very low percentage of employees that really feel engaged at work. And there's been some research on how to improve those situations. And actually, I'll share a couple of the findings that Gallup found in their book. And this one is, I'm just using this for illustrative purposes here, but employees whose managers involved them in setting goals, according to Gallup, were nearly 4 times more likely to be engaged than other employees. So, if you talked with your employees about what the goals should be within reason, you don't work with the employees to set some really low goal that's easy to achieve. You set goals that are reasonable for that person, that maybe are a stretch, but they still can achieve that goal. When managers took time to communicate and work with their employees in order to establish those goals, employees were 4 times more likely to feel engaged. And that engagement means, just to define that a little bit, employee engagement is when that employee feels connected with their work, with the other employees at work, when they feel focused on what they're doing, and they really are sincerely trying to do their best and trying to help their team do its best. That's an engaged employee. When you have somebody that's showing up because they're getting a paycheck and they're, just punching the clock and doing the minimum in order to get by, that's a classic disengaged employee. And we can measure those attitudes. Another one they found was employees who receive daily feedback from their manager are 3 times more likely to be engaged than those who receive feedback once a year or less. And I love this finding that they came out with it, because I found that 15 years ago working with dairy employees. In that when we were looking at a little bit different factor called organizational commitment, which is actually quite similar to employee engagement, we found that feedback, the quality and the amount of feedback that managers, dairy managers in this case, were giving to dairy employees directly affected how committed those employees felt to that organization where they were working. So employees, and I'll share some of the qualitative information, some of the comments that we got from those dairy employees about feedback was that they wanted the feedback, they wanted more feedback. And actually, when you ask employees, all different kinds of employees, whether they get enough feedback about their work, they'll almost always say no, because they always want more. But this was just in the last few years, Gallup came out with this book and really was keying in on these 2 areas of setting goals with employees and giving feedback to employees as really driving engagement. I came up with this kind of way of looking at it quite a few years ago. And again, in that Gallup book, they used a little bit different terminology, but they also boiled it down to these 3 things that I'm going to talk about and what I call the performance triad. And I really came up with this just out of my own experience and working with a lot of different managers and supervisors as we were learning. And I kept getting this question over and over, and that it was, okay, where do you begin? What would you start with? Oh, sorry. I didn't realize that my slides weren't shared. That's okay. I just got to the good one. I'll go back one just so you can see where I was on that one. But just, I shared that stuff verbally. So yeah, my apologies. The performance triad. So people were asking me, okay, where would you start? If I'm a supervisor, and then literally it was dairy managers, supervisors that were talking and asking, hey, if I want to get better altogether at managing employees, where would I start? And I thought about that, and having worked with a lot of other organizations with managers learning, and I really boiled it down to this is the three. This is the core essentials of what it's about. And again, a little bit of a nerd and my side of things, but having that confirmed then by research later was exciting for me, but it's not exciting for anybody else, but I'll just share that. The bottom line is expectations. So, and we'll start there. So setting our expectations, being super clear about what is expected of employees, and that includes things like job descriptions, handbooks, SOPs, onboarding. We'll talk about a lot of those things going forward. Clear about what is expected. If we can get that totally clear, things go so much better. Training and development. So anything, this is coaching, this is sending someone out for training, it's on-the-job training, whatever we do to build knowledge and skills, and I represent that with training. Anything to build knowledge, skills, and potentially adjust people's attitudes about their work. And then the third leg of this core is feedback. And feedback is not just, hey, thanks for coming to work today. Good job. Those are nice things to say, but they're not feedback. You know, I might say, Charlie, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for your insight in that breakout. You did a good job organizing folks there and sharing some of your perspectives, and that was a good story. I appreciate that, and you really added to our team and to our learning tonight. That's feedback, right? And we're going to get into that a lot more in a future session, but it's more than just good job. And then the upward arrow in the middle, I tend to sometimes forget that because it seems obvious to me, but that's employee performance. If we're doing a good job with expectations, training, and feedback, then performance is going to go up. And so that's the core of it. So this is one of the take-homes. So whether you're a manager yourself or whether you are working with clients, share that triad, share that with them, and talk about those three things. Look, hey, Joe, if you want to be a better manager, make sure you're clear on those expectations so people know exactly what you expect and how and why exactly. And then training, make sure that they've got the skills that they need to do this job. And it's not just basic skills, maybe they're developing knowledge over time and you're coaching them. And then last, give them feedback on a regular basis, not once a year feedback, not an annual performance review. Feedback at least every week. Every employee should hear something about their work every week, especially in a farm setting. All right. So digging in a little bit more, 2 essential questions to answer for employees. What is expected of me and how am I doing? And so that, we're starting to get there with the expectations, and I want to expand on that a little bit more. So let's talk about behavioral expectations. So we often think about performance, about how we're going to, how much milk we're going to produce, how the calves are going to be managed, all those sort of things. But first of all, there's some behavioral things. In reality, I think a lot of times these behavioral issues pop up as more problematic than some of the other performance issues do. What time do I arrive for work? Have we been clear about that? When I arrive for work, am I supposed to be ready to work? Or am I, does that mean that I have to go and put my work clothes on and put my lunch away and then 10 minutes later I'll be ready to work? What does that mean? My daughter right now has a soccer coach and he says 10 minutes, 10 minutes early is 5 minutes late. So he wants them there 15 minutes before because 10 minutes early is 5 minutes late. It's a clever way to put it, and he's really been doing a good job with discipline with that team. But he's been very, very clear with that statement about what time he wants them to be there. Oh, how should I treat the animals? Can I be clear about that? What one person sees as abuse of an animal, another person just sees as moving that animal. Be clear, be specific about that on your farm and provide that training. I think things like the farm program have come a long way to help us have a language and be more consistent about our expectations there. What type of attitude is acceptable here? How do I interact with other people? What kind of team behaviors are acceptable on this farm? Those things, sometimes people feel like these are off limits. Like supervisors feel that, oh, I need to only focus on work performance. There's a myth out there to that effect. Well, that's just a myth. In fact, attitude issues. So if you've got somebody that's got a negative attitude, or they're picking on other people, or they're always running down leadership on the farm or something like that, and they just aren't helping the team or supporting the team, supervisors need to deal with those things quickly and right away, because if we want to build a positive attitude, if we want people to be lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down, then we need to enforce that and be specific about what we mean about those behaviors. Who should I go to when I have a question? That's a question that employees have all the time that often isn't very well clarified. When can I use my cell phone? About 3 years ago, this question was coming up. Oh, I got something in my eye. This question was coming up over and over again on farms that I worked with, because they were having challenges with cell phone usage and trying to figure out what to do. And farms actually ended up managing that in very different ways. Some outlawing cell phones, some limiting their use to certain times. But what was really important was that managers clarify exactly what the expectations were for cell phones. And just to kind of finish the story on those cell phone issues a little bit, one of the things that some of the farms that I worked with that were working on their policies there is that if you try to outlaw cell phones, it's going to be really tough. People are going to resist that. They're going to sneak, and they're going to do all kinds of things to get those cell phones to be able to, or other devices to be able to have access to them. But if they give reasonable times when they can use them, and they set parameters like safety parameters, you can't have the earbuds in when you're operating a piece of machinery so that you can't hear anything, or other situations where you need to be able to hear what's going on. Those situations, that worked better when they set some reasonable expectations that way. What about the performance side of things? So expectations are, really basic performance that is expected of everyone. So in a dairy, it might be every teat end is clean. We're not going to set an expectation like a goal and say, okay, we want 90% of teat ends to be clean. Well, Charlie's going to get pretty upset because I know he's a veterinarian, so that's not going to fly. Our expectation needs to be that every teat end is clean when that cow is prepped. Follow the SOP every time, right? That's why we have a standard operating procedure. Follow it every time. Don't abuse the animals. Safe equipment operation, positive team attitudes. All these things are expectations. And generally an expectation is something that, if we fail to meet it, that's a problem. Whereas goals, these are more things that we stretch to achieve and may not always hit. So milk quality targets, those could be goals that we're aiming at, and sometimes we may not hit them if they're stretch goals. Harvesting so many tons of silage this week, we may set that as a goal for this week. We may or may not hit that, but we're going to celebrate if we do, because that was great. Live births in the maternity pen, we've got goals for that, things that can go up and down. We want to stretch ourselves to achieve those. We want both of those, and we will be communicating about them with our employees. So in addition to the just basic behavioral expectations. Here's another one from a management standpoint. Employee turnover below 20%. Hey, we could set a goal for that and then take specific management actions to try to reduce turnover in our farm. Let me wrap it up here with expectations. And I just love this kid's expression. So, and I felt this way at times, but I just want to wrap it up with this really clear statement. When we are totally clear about our expectations, employees are much more likely to achieve them, right? It's kind of a forehead slap, right? But in so many cases, I go into farms and we haven't been clear about that. And it's not just at the employee level, not just at the supervisor relationship level. What about in that transition situation? I know some of you on the call have been involved in farm transitions, and that senior generation says, I want to start stepping back a little bit over the next couple of years. You've all heard that 100 times, I know, that have been involved with that, right? What does that mean? It's such a general statement. Does that mean that you're going to be showing up once a week? Does it mean you're going to be here 5 days a week? Does it mean you're going to be actively involved in, A, B, and C parts of the business? What does it mean? It means nothing until you start to clarify exactly what those expectations. So there's a lot of areas that expectations need to be clarified about, but employees are way more likely if those are clear. All right, let's stop here and let's go to another breakout. So I've got a couple of questions there, and I'm going to try something a little bit different this time. I'll try to put this in a chat, so hopefully you have those questions with you. But we'll take about the same amount of time, Jane. And so when have you experienced a mismatch in expectations, either in work or outside work? And did it cause some tension in the relationship? The expectations between you and another person just weren't the same. Here's another one. You don't have to, let's just pick 2 out of 3 of these because these get pretty involved. Have you ever experienced a work relationship where 2 people were totally aligned and in sync, almost like they could read each other's minds? They just were that close and that simpatico. How efficient was that work? So share a little bit about that one possibly. And then last one is, how can we take some steps toward achieving like that number 2, that really efficient relationship in our other work relationships by clarifying these expectations? Okay. Those make sense? All right, welcome back, everyone. Did you have a good discussion?
I'd say so.
And if you can get all the folks that you work with to just focus on clarifying expectations, they'll have a better experience. So they'll make some progress. Yeah, we had a good conversation in the other room, and one of the conclusions was, if you can just clarify expectations in all kinds of relationships, whether it's a marriage or friendship or work relationship or whatever, it'll make things go a lot smoother. I thought that was a good insight. Any good insights to share from the other group?
Charlie, Veronica, anyone in our group?
I think we just had examples of bad situations when expectations were not clear and conflict that resulted, without retelling stories. That was the gist of what I heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We actually talked a little bit, Rich, about what happens if you have both of those scenarios in the same workspace. So you have one employee where the boss and the employer are totally aligned, and one where there's a mismatch or they're out of sync, and what happens in that situation. And a couple people in the group had actually experienced that, so that was good.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that can be a challenge. All right, let's talk a little bit about the work experience then. So we set some kind of key groundwork around the communications and relationships, and now establishing expectations. Well, we go a little bit deeper into expectations. So we've got a bunch of tools that we use that can help us to establish these expectations, but often we haven't thought about them this way before. Now I'm going to start here. Job descriptions. Do I have to write job descriptions? Well, that definitely is a question. Here we go. My answer to that question is no. Not if you're just going to stash them in a drawer somewhere. Then no, you don't have to write job descriptions. Don't even bother. It's a waste of your time. What about this one? No. If you're doing it just because I said so, or some other person that's supposed to be an HR expert said so, that's not a good reason either. Only if you're doing it for the right reason. And there's only one real right reason for writing job descriptions, and that's clarity. That's being absolutely clear about what the expectations are for this person that's working in this particular job that we're describing. Now, the frontline jobs, the milker jobs, those are the easy jobs to clarify on a farm. Go ahead and do the hard ones first. Do the management positions. I've worked with a bunch of different farms where, especially in some cases when they were in conflict, where the management team was in conflict with one another and not seeing each other eye to eye. And one of the first things that I did with that group is start to break down some of the conflicts that they have, figure out what exactly caused it, what were the sequence of events, and then we started to break it apart a little bit differently. Okay, who's responsible for what? Who's responsible for this task? Who's responsible for this part of the business, and making sure this gets done? And then I use a room and I use a flip chart paper and start writing that stuff down around the room and then organizing it by the different people. Well, guess what? We're writing job descriptions. And I found over and over with management teams that, especially on farms, there's a lot of times when that has never been done. When dad and son and daughter, or whoever other family members or other non-family partners involved, it was never clarified who was going to be doing what, who was responsible for what decisions, and that sort of thing. And if we do those things by writing job descriptions, by talking about it and sorting those things out, we avoid a whole lot of conflicts, and we clarify expectations for everyone. That's the reason for really writing job descriptions. Now, I'm not going to go through the nuts and bolts. We don't have time to get into all that. But part of what we're doing with these series of workshops is trying to give you tools that you can use with your clients or on your own farm to help get organized. Things like job descriptions are, they're fairly straightforward. I'll show you a couple of examples. But the act of writing them well to get this kind of clarity and working through some of these decisions that need to be made, that's where the power is. So go to our website. This is my website at Cornell. You can see it right there. I won't read it to you. There's a page on job descriptions that's got a lot of resources there for you. I just want to share a couple of example job descriptions that I've worked with people to develop. This is just the title of a farm operator. This is like an equipment operator type person. Just a little summary of it, brief. This is all done in one page. Some qualifications that the person needs to be able to do to be successful in this job. Then there are primary duties, and you don't necessarily have to break them out by primary and secondary. I find this is helpful because these primary duties, these are the main thing. And think about that. You've said the main thing. Okay. The main thing for you to understand about your job is, bam, the primary duties, right? The main things. But then the main things aren't the only things. There's probably some other stuff, some secondary duties, always that other duties as assigned. There's probably some things like that we're going to do, and this position is going to pitch in on. But that's good enough. That's not rocket science. That's a frontline type of position. Here's a manager type of position. Same idea. This could be a family member. This could be a hired manager. But a little bit more qualifications, a little bit different qualifications, I would say. The primary duties, primary duty of a dairy manager is not just to look at Dairy Comp 305. It really is to lead and organize employees, right? That's really the primary duty. And then there's a lot of other things that are also the main things that people ought to be working on. Some secondary stuff, although I struggle with safety. That maybe ought to be one of the primary duties, but whatever, it's in there and it's on the list of duties. So, I won't belabor that, but you start doing this, work through the process, clarify who's doing what, who's responsible for what, and clarifying those expectations. This is powerful stuff, but do it for the right reasons. SOPs, I see SOPs, standard operating procedures, on lots of farms now, and that's wonderful. Wonderful. I'm so glad to see that. Just a couple of examples here with some that I've worked with farms on. Things on farms they're really quite complex. Just think about the steps that you need to set up a milking parlor. If you're going to talk through that with someone, it takes a while to train them. But if you can take some pictures, and I love this format because anybody can do this. Just go in there, take the cell phone, take a bunch of pictures of somebody doing the job right, put a little bit of text to it. If you take a lot of pictures, what language are those pictures in? They're in any language, right? So people can see the pictures and generally follow the steps. This newborn calf care, we got some pictures combined with some steps that we're doing. I'm not going to belabor that issue either of how to write standard operating procedures. because there's a lot of them out there. I will give you a couple of quick tips. When you're writing SOPs, people get a little bit hung up on the wording, and they'll get really, really wordy. This is a good example here on the left. Notice that each of these steps starts with a verb. Take a clean filter, access the filter, turn black knob, put 2 stoppers in. Your writing will be so much more clear and concise and easy for the person to understand if you write a series of commands. That's what those are. That's command form. Do this, do that, do the other thing. It is the clearest way that you can ever write. And so keep that in mind as you're writing steps. Try in almost all cases to begin with an action verb. Okay. The purpose of SOPs, and again, I like to get to purposes and get us to remember these things, is to control variation that people introduce into a system. That's what it's about. Now, there's some other effects. It makes training much easier. It makes accountability clearer and that sort of thing. But ultimately, we put a milking SOP in place so that everybody milks cows the same way. We put a calf feeding SOP. We put a feeding the cows SOP. All those things are in place so that we're consistent. Because if we're not consistent and we've got 6 people doing this job in 6 different ways, it's called a system that is totally out of control at that point. Nobody knows what's happening from one day to the next. So if you've got an out of control system, first thing you need to do is get everybody to do it the same way. I don't care if they're all doing it wrong, at least they're doing it the same way. And then you can start taking steps because now you've got a system that's under control. I hope everybody thinks about that intuitively, but let me show you a little illustration. So, when you've only got 2 people doing a task, there's not as much room for variation because it's easier for communications to take place between 2 people. But that being said, I've seen 2 people doing one task and doing it differently. When you've got more people doing a task, you've got a lot more potential for variation. There we go. I went too fast on that. So we've got, sorry, my graphics aren't working. You got 6 people doing this task and they're all doing it slightly differently. The SOP is helping us to get to this point where those 6 people are doing it all the same way. Sorry about my graphics. Okay, let's talk about the why. Knowing why, not just what I'm supposed to do, but why I'm supposed to be doing it, helps employees to feel engaged. Really gets back to that concept of getting their buy-in into this process when I know why. Now, the why can take many forms. It can be the need to get a process, because we have to get this process under control, like I talked about, to try to optimize it and use the resources as best we can. Because livestock or plant health, depends on having it done the right way. Safety reasons, the best use of resources. There's a whole bunch of other reasons why we might be using a standard operating procedure to try to get everyone doing it exactly the same way. And a bunch of these reasons might apply for whatever your particular procedure is. But make sure you can answer those questions and make sure you've got a good reason for putting an SOP in place. Not just because you're a control freak, but because there is a good reason for this to be done consistently so that we can make sure it's repeatable, so that we can improve over time. That's the big whys about getting SOPs in place. And then last of all, whenever possible, involve employees in developing the SOP. And if you do, that way they feel like they own this SOP and have a big stake in it. Again, same website you can go to get some of the resources. I highly recommend the SOP writing guide. You'll see Penn State logos on that, and that comes from the time when I worked for Penn State. It's like 20 years old, and that thing has been used all around the world. It's one of the most popular pieces that I ever wrote. But it's up on our website, and you can print out that SOP writing guide. And I think you'll get a lot out of it because it really goes through the nuts and bolts of how to write SOPs, and not just how to write them, but how to get them well adopted in your workplace, how to get the team to buy into them, and how to manage them over time as well. So that's I think a great resource for you for writing SOPs, and a few more examples on the webpage as well. Now, one other thing I want to revisit is checklists. And checklists, this is nothing complicated. I mean, you likely have a to-do list. Many people use that. It's so satisfying to check those off. That's the most basic checklist you can possibly have. I've got one on my phone. I'm always doing projects around the house, and so I keep a hardware store list. So whenever I go to the hardware store, I can look on my list. Otherwise, I forget a couple of things. Oh, here's one: the whiteboard in the shop. I don't know how many times I've been to farms and found people loitering around the shop at the beginning of the day. They're waiting for the boss to come out and tell them what we're going to do for the day. A place where I worked in college was a farm just like that. And we loitered outside and waited until the boss came out and told us what we were going to do. What a waste of time. And for employees, a lot of times, it's boring. It's where problems can happen, or, just a lot of little things not getting done that could be done. Worked with a team one time, and they came up with the idea of, let's put a whiteboard in the shop and let's write on there the little things that need to be done. That sweep up job that needs to be done, that little, repair that needs to be done over here, that grass that needs to be mowed, all these little things that when you've got a few minutes of time, you can get in there and check one of those things off. Well, then that team on that farm that came up with the idea, at first it was the manager putting that information up, and then they improved it. And they came up with the idea of, oh, well, other people can put things on the list too. And so suddenly you had them self-managing that on a lot of little things that needed to happen.
Rich,
Yeah.
you had a question whether or not you can put links in the chat. What I was just going to let Sally know that we'll put the links in the follow-up email so you'll get them. But I'll go ahead and paste them in the chat now too.
And Jane, I think we're also going to provide the presentation as a PDF.
Yeah, you'll have the presentation as well. Yeah,
and so the presentation, those links should be active in the presentation, so you'll get them. But great, thanks. Time tracking software. I've been using a software called Deputy and worked with a couple of farms to put that in place. It's got a punch list in there, so that you can assign, so employees can use a supervisor, I should say, can use their cell phone or the computer, whatever app they want, and they can assign tasks to an employee for that day. And it's a punch list, or it can be recurring tasks. When someone checks in then to be a milker, a calf feeder, or whatever, they can have their checklist of things on their cell phone for what to do. So, we can really use technology to really ramp up our game with things like checklists. I wanted to share, this is an example. This is from a farm. I got it from a colleague that I work with closely in the Midwest, from a farm that he worked with on this checklist. And it's kind of soup to nuts. It's the before leaving checklist. Makes sense. It's got some different things like the doors and curtains around the barn. It has some atmospheric issues. You're going to do some things differently in the wintertime about closing up the barn than you're going to do in the middle of summer. And it depends on the weather. So, just a number of things like that. We can become so much more efficient, organized, and so much more clear about our expectations on the farm when we just spend a little bit of time developing some tools like this. And the basic one is just checklists. I'm going to begin to come to wrap up here. And I just wanted to show you something real quick we've started to work with recently. And this is this whole idea. Some of you may have heard of lean systems, of lean manufacturing. It's a I won't say it's a buzzword. It's a business term for a whole philosophy of management. And that philosophy actually is what transformed, or part of what transformed Japan after World War II to help them become the manufacturing powerhouse that they became. Well, lean's being used in a whole lot of places in different ways around the world. It really engages employees. This is just one aspect of it. It's called the 5S approach. And this is about organizing the physical workplace itself. So, and I don't have time to get into this in great detail, but one is sort. So that is, you're taking the workplace and you've got that messy, pump room in the milk house or whatever, or the milk house itself. if you're going to use the 5S approach there, what you would do is you would take everything that's not bolted down out of that place and sort the things that you need in there to do the work, the things that aren't needed there and should be trashed, and the things that are needed on the farm somewhere else. And then set in order as you put things back in there that are needed and are in order. It's a little more complex than that. Shine is having a way to keep it in order and keep it clean. Standardize is really standard operating procedures, checklists, and things like that we just talked about. And sustain is basically building time into the workday. A short period of time, 5 minutes every day, cleaning up an area where you worked will keep that place clean. You know, when you never clean it up, when you never sustain all these things, then eventually it accumulates and gets to be a mess. But if you have 5 minutes built into the workday and expected that you're going to sustain, you're going to clean things up, and you're going to set things in order, then it happens. When it's an expectation that it happens. That's a super brief introduction. There's a whole book on the lean dairy farm. This comes out of Australia. Great read, excellent examples in there. If you're interested in that philosophy, we're actually working, and some of my colleagues here at Cornell, we're working with some farms now, trying it out, getting some experiences from implementing lean with dairy farms. And I think it's got a world of potential for the future. All right, let's wrap it up here. So we've talked about communications and relationships. We've talked about clarifying expectations. And we've really talked about organizing the work experience. We've covered a lot of waterfront in a short period of time. And then looking ahead, we're going to be getting into feedback and coaching in 2 weeks, which is super important. Onboarding, employee handbooks, and then communicating through conflict. So we've got some really meaty stuff, some really good stuff in the coming weeks. I'm going to stop there. It's close to 8:30, but I'm happy. It is 8:32. Happy to take a couple of questions if you've got some here tonight. And thanks for participating.
Does anyone have any questions for Rich before we wrap up?
I just wondered, so we have employees that have been with us for, you know, over 5 years, some close to 10 years, and we don't have like employee handbooks. That's one thing I'm trying to push. You know, the old school, my father-in-law never had that, but we only had family employees. Well, now that we've expanded and we, you know, in the last 10 years or so have had all these other employees, and still nobody wanted to do any kind of handbooks. But how do you do a handbook with employees that are used to not having a handbook? I guess that's the question. And do you even, you know, I've worked in places where you have job descriptions, and then, you know, on a farm, there's a lot of jobs that come up that we might ask someone to do. And in a place where I've worked, I've had someone say, well, that's not in my job description. How do you avoid those kinds of things? Or do you just not, at this point, maybe have handbooks for new employees, which I hope we don't have too many of? I don't know. Like, that's my question, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Let me do the second one first. So job descriptions. I'm sorry, I'm having brain freeze here. What did you ask about job descriptions?
Well, I said, yeah, the job descriptions. How do you give job descriptions and then have a potential where somebody says, yeah, that's not in my job description?
Yeah. That's why you always have that last thing on there, and other duties as assigned, right? So you always have that, but that's not really a cop out. Everybody, you know, that just says, hey, we pitch in together when something needs to be done. But that's a great question, Terry, because look, a job description describes the job. It doesn't necessarily describe every single detail of the job. It describes the main things that they do and some of the secondary duties. But hey, the reality is they're part of the team, and we pitch in to do things together. So, you know, sometimes, you know, at your farm, you know, you walk out there and if there's some trash laying around, you pick it up, right? And you get it out of there. Well, whose job description is that in? It's not going to appear in anybody's job description, but it's going to be clear that, you know, we pick up around here, we make sure that things look presentable or whatever. That's just one of an example of that sort of thing. don't ever position a job description and give people that out as saying, well, that's not my job description, because they'll take that, and that's totally unacceptable. That's a poor attitude, and you just need to nip that one in the bud. Over to the employee handbooks. Definitely don't have employee handbooks for new people and not for the old people, because then you just create two classes of people on the farm. Then no, you need to have an employee, and I'll have a lot more to say about the employee handbooks when we get to that section. But generally, people appreciate having things be clarified. Generally, they appreciate having the opportunity to say, "Oh, okay, we can go in here and look at this and talk about it." And I would say, if you've got trusted employees as you're developing your handbook, within reason, share it with them. Give them an opportunity to have some feedback and input. Maybe you don't share the whole thing with them. Maybe you just share some of the policies that you're thinking through, and take that opportunity as you're developing it, because if they can get some buy-in to that, that's great. But again, we'll talk about that in more detail in another session. But good question, and I think it's important for both long-term employees and new employees.
Great, thank you so much.
Other questions for Rich?
Yes, I do have one question, Rich. You talk about the beginning about, especially when you have multilingual workforce, right? People, and they tend to create their silos, right?
Yes.
For the Spaniards or the Spanish-speaking employees and the Americans on the other side. I'm wondering if you can give any tips for us on how to prevent, to create those silos. How can we actually make everybody to feel, that they are part of the workforce? It's not like there are two groups.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think one of the first parts, and this is kind of good management with any, whether it's multilingual groups or not, but just make sure the employees understand how the different parts of the farm fit together, right? So if the milking operations are going to be successful, it's got to have quality feed, and that comes from the cropping part of the operation. So it's important to get the different types of employees to understand each other, what they're doing, why it's important, and how they actually interact and support each other. That's one, just kind of a big picture thing. It's just getting people to understand that aspect of it. But then I think it's important to have opportunities, have ways, even if you have to create that, team meetings, social functions where they get together, and these don't have to be a big deal. They can be a pizza party. They can be, just times when we get together and interact and stuff, or they can be, there's some farms that do a wonderful job with periodically throughout the year, getting everyone together and having a significant meal, whether it's, around Christmas time or whether it's in the fall, and they're just kind of celebrating some things that way. Things like recognizing birthdays or recognizing just accomplishments or things that are happening in people's lives, and anything we can do to try to bring these groups together and break down the silos is very well worth it, because we don't want those silos to build up. There's a lot of bad things that can happen when we've got divisions among employees or among different groups in the business. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome.
Other questions for Rich? I thought this was really valuable, Rich. I hope everybody else enjoyed it. I am going to share, for those of you who do want the VET credits, this slide with the monkey survey link. Can everyone see that? If you want the VET credits, you just need to go into that link and complete the short survey. I think it's 4 questions. So if you complete that, enter your name and your email, we will send you a certificate of completion for the 1.5 credits. Otherwise, I don't have a lot to close out with. I want to thank Rich for taking the time this evening. I thought this was really interesting. I enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. The session that we have coming up next is October 12th, and it will focus on feedback and coaching, which are the leader's powerful tools. Again, if you can't attend in person, you can watch the recordings afterwards. But I do think those of you who are on tonight will agree that it was definitely better to be here in person. And if you do know of others who might benefit from this series, who missed tonight's session, they can still register. They just need to go to our website and register on our homepage. So again, thanks for joining and have a great evening. Thank you.
All right,
Jane,
thanks.
did you say
Bye,
you're gonna,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Jane,
just
did you
so-
say you're gonna send that link out?
Yeah, for the survey, yeah, I'm going to send all of the links
Oh,
out in a
okay.
follow-up email. It'll probably come from Heidi Zimmerman tomorrow morning or from me.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
enough.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Rich, I thought this
Hey.
went really well.
Oh, great.